You know, usually when you pick up a book, there's this kind of implicit social contract between you and the author.
Yeah, yeah, like they present a story or a theory and you just sit back and evaluate it.
Exactly. It is a completely passive relationship. I mean, you evaluate the claims, maybe you agree with them, or, maybe you just toss the book aside.
Yeah, you are basically the judge in that scenario.
But imagine opening a text that immediately shatters that contract. Like imagine a text that does not just present information to you, but actively challenges you to prove it wrong.
Oh, that is a huge shift in dynamic.
It really is. It draws a line in the sand, looks you right in the eye, and explicitly predicts that you will never, ever be able to defeat its challenge.
Which is an incredibly bold claim for any text to make.
Right? We are exploring a really profound, controversial, and frankly, terrifying sequence in the Quran.
Specifically, chapter 2, verse 24, along with its really crucial setup in verse 23.
Yeah, we are going to look at the actual text, the historical context, and the psychological weight of what is being claimed here.
Yeah.
And if you are joining us, just know we are sourcing this from complete translations of the Quran, the Sahih Hadith.
Which, just for context, are the rigorously authenticated, mathematically verified records of the Prophet Muhammad's sayings and actions.
Exactly. And we're also pulling from the classical Tafsir.
Yeah, the Tafsir is crucial here because you really cannot read a 7th century text through a 21st century lens without losing the structural integrity of the message.
Right. You need that scholarly exegesis to ground it. So we are relying heavily on the classical works of scholars like Ibn Kathir and Al-Jalalain.
And Ibn Kathir, who is writing in the 14th century, gives us these incredibly granular historical and physical interpretations.
Well, the Tafsir of Al-Jalalain provides this amazing linguistic and symbolic depth. And looking at these sources impartially, what really emerges is not just a theological statement, but a staggering psychological maneuver.
It really is. I mean, we are so used to authors trying to persuade us with charm or, logical syllogisms.
They try to win you over.
Exactly. They do not usually actively dare the entire human race to dismantle their life's work on a structural level.
Which creates this massive tension. Because we are talking about an era and a place where oral tradition wasn't just some casual pastime, It was the entire framework of society.
Yeah, poetry and speech were everything.
So to really understand verse 24, we have to start with the premise of doubt that gets laid out in verse 23. The classical tafsir establishes that the speaker here is Allah, addressing the doubters of the time.
And we're talking about a highly complex geopolitical and theological landscape in 7th century Arabia.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because you have the Arab pagans who control the economic hub of Mecca, right?
Right. And you also have the established local Jewish tribes who have these really deep scriptural traditions.
And the Christians, who are looking at the Prophet Muhammad and harboring serious active doubts about his legitimacy.
Well, we have to analyze why that doubt existed in the first place. Because it was not just passive skepticism.
No, it was very active.
Yeah. The Quran refers to Muhammad here as our servant. And from the divine perspective within the text, this is the highest title of honor. It establishes a direct, unbroken line of submission and authority.
But from the perspective of the doubters, the pagans, the Jews, and the Christians, that specific phrase highlighted his ordinary human status.
Exactly. He was a man they knew intimately. I mean, he walked in their markets, he traded with them, and crucially, he was unlettered.
Right. He did not have any formal scholarly training.
No, he wasn't trained in the scriptural schools of the Jewish rabbis, nor was he some celebrated elite poet among the Arabs.
Which makes his sudden delivery of this complex, linguistically flawless scripture an immediate threat to the established social hierarchy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you are a tribal leader whose power is based entirely on your lineage and your poetic prowess.
Or if you are a religious scholar whose authority comes from decades of studying ancient scrolls.
Then this unlettered merchant suddenly claiming direct communication from the creator of the universe is a massive disruption to your life.
So they didn't just doubt him. They actively accused him of inventing the text himself.
Right. They claimed it was a complete fabrication, a man-made document designed to basically usurp their political and religious power.
And that accusation of fabrication is the exact trigger for the challenge in verse 23.
Yeah, because if the pagans and the scriptural tribes are absolutely convinced that Muhammad is just making this up, the most logical next step for the text is not to beg for their belief.
It is to call their bluff.
Exactly. The text says, if you are in doubt about what we have sent down upon our servant, then produce a surah, which is a single chapter, the like thereof.
it completely shifts the burden of proof entirely onto the skeptic.
Yes, it puts the ball entirely in their court.
But let's look at the scope of this challenge, because this is where the mechanics of it completely blow my mind. When we think of a chapter of a holy book, the modern mind usually pictures pages and pages of dense, complex scripture.
Right, you think of like the Book of Genesis or some long philosophical treatise.
Exactly. But the challenge here is breathtakingly narrow. The shortest chapter in the Quran Surah Al-Kawthar is only 3 verses long.
Yes. 10 words in Arabic, to be exact.
Yeah, really? Only 3 verses.
Only 3 verses. So in fact, Allah is asking the disbelievers to produce only 3 verses to form a chapter.
That is wild. They just have to string together 3 verses that match the stylistic eloquence and the structural perfection of the Quran.
And the unseen knowledge contained in it, yes.
See, I have to push back on this a little bit. How do we measure this objectively? I mean, isn't poetry and literature completely subjective?
I mean, like, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How do you judge a linguistic challenge? Because I could write 3 verses right now, and depending on who reads it, they might think it's profound, or they might think it is complete nonsense.
That is a fair point for modern literature.
Right. So how is this not just an unwinnable game where the judge and the jury are rigged from the start?
Well, that assumes the Arabic linguistic environment of the 7th century was subjective in the way modern free verse poetry is today, and it really wasn't.
Oh, it was more structured.
Extremely structured. The 7th century Arabs operated on a highly codified, mathematically precise system of poetry and prose. They had these established meters known as the bihar, which rigidly governed rhythm, rhyme, and structure.
Okay, so it was almost like a science to them.
Yes, they held massive annual poetry competitions, like the Market of Ukaz, which were essentially the Olympics of linguistics.
The Olympics of linguistics, I love that.
Poetry was their historical record. You know, it was their legal code, their political propaganda. They memorized thousands of lines of complex verse.
So they were experts.
Exactly. So when the Quran was recited, it didn't just sound nice. It actively broke their established metrical rules. It wasn't standard poetry, and it wasn't standard rhymed prose.
But it still worked.
It more than worked. It achieved a cadence, a rhythmic perfection, and a density of meaning that they could not categorize or replicate using their own tools.
Okay, so it is not a subjective measure of, do you like this poem? It is an objective challenge to the structural mechanics of the language itself.
Exactly right.
To put it in modern terms for the listener, it's like an open source bounty program. Imagine a massive tech company writes a revolutionary new operating system.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right, and they put out a standing challenge to the entire world of hackers and engineers saying, here is the source code. Find a single flaw or write an algorithm that matches this efficiency using only 3 lines of code.
That is a great analogy. It is an open invitation to break the system.
And the rules of the Quranic challenge are completely open too. The verse explicitly tells the doubters to call upon their witnesses, their supporters, their scholars.
And even any false gods they worship other than Allah to help them.
Right. It is an all-hands-on-deck invitation. Bring your best minds, bring your deities, bring everyone together and just write 3 verses.
And what is fascinating here is the historical reality. The Arabs of that era, the undisputed masters of eloquence, were entirely paralyzed by this.
Even with all their expertise.
Yes. The Tafsir notes that Allah challenged all the disbelievers, both the Arabs, who are the linguistic masters, and the non-Arabs.
And these were people who would go to war over an insult embedded in a poem.
Exactly. If anyone could have exposed linguistic fraud, it was them. They had the motive, they had the linguistic tools, and they had the cultural imperative to destroy Muhammad's credibility.
Yet they were unable to meet this challenge.
They couldn't string together 3 verses that carried the same unique rhythm and rhetorical power without falling into pre-existing clunky poetic tropes.
Which brings us to the timeline of all this. Because this challenge was not just issued for a weekend hackathon.
No, not at all.
This challenge has stood for over 14 centuries. As the source material highlights, and we are referencing scholars like Ahmed Deedat here, since the Quran was revealed, this challenge still stands and has not been fulfilled.
To this day, none has met the challenge.
But surely, over 1,400 years, with the vast expansion of the Arabic-speaking world, someone has tried.
Oh, there have been numerous attempts. But examining those attempts is actually what validates the challenge.
How so?
Because instead of creating original, comparable verses that meet the linguistic criteria, opponents have historically resorted to evasions and mimicry.
Like what did they do?
Well, for instance, in the modern era, there were attempts by some Arab Christians to produce what they called Gospels in Quranic style.
Oh, interesting. So they wanted to create a literary counterweight.
Yes, but they merely ended up plagiarizing the Quran.
Really? They just copied it.
Yeah, they essentially stole words, rhythms, and phrases from the Quran itself, right down to lifting the Bismillah, the opening phrase, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, to start their own chapters.
Wow. So they couldn't create a new literary paradigm at all.
No, they could only clumsily copy the source code and change the font, to use your software analogy. They didn't write a new operating system. They just slapped a different logo on the existing one and claimed it was original.
Which just proves the point. The inability to produce something fundamentally original yet equal in linguistic power is presented by the text as absolute objective proof of the Quran's divine origin.
Exactly. The text is demonstrating that this is not ordinary human speech.
And that failure exposes a really profound psychological truth about human nature, which the sources emphasize heavily.
It really does.
I mean, when people are faced with a truth they cannot refute, but they also deeply do not want to accept it because it would destroy their worldview, they rarely just admit defeat.
No, they build defensive walls. The classical texts actually liken this psychological defense mechanism to the famous fable of the fox and the grapes.
Oh, right, where the fox jumps repeatedly for the grapes, realizes he physically cannot reach them, and instead of admitting his limitation, he just walks away declaring, those grapes were probably sour anyway.
Exactly. The disbelievers were challenged to produce something that matched the style of the Quran, but they were unable to do so, so they started making excuses.
Just like the fox. The sources make a striking observation here, too. They point out that human psychology shows it is often easier to harbor hatred, to basically disguise Muslims and reject the text out of hand, than to sit down, face the intellectual challenge objectively, and attempt to create only 3 verses to form a chapter.
Because the Quran is the truth. And in reality, it is much easier to hate Muslims than to create 3 verses like the ones in the Quran.
It is the ultimate vulnerability of the human ego. Humans would rather nurse a 1,400-year-old grudge than admit the limits of their own intellect.
And the Quran addresses this psychological evasion directly in chapter 10, verse 39. It explains that people tend to deny that which they cannot encompass in knowledge.
Right. When faced with a linguistic and theological structure vastly superior to their own capabilities, the ego just recoils.
The result is denial, hostility, and ultimately hatred. It is a defense mechanism against the overwhelming reality of the divine.
And it wasn't just the pagan Arabs engaging in this deflection, right? The historical context shows the Jewish and Christian tribes doing the exact same thing, but using their own theological frameworks as the shield.
Yes. The exegesis notes that some Jews and Christians of the time would simply say, the Quran is against us.
Basically just brushing it off.
Yeah, right. They systematically tried to move attention away from the fact that they had not been able to produce even a single chapter like any chapter in the Quran.
So they deflected the intellectual challenge by retreating into theological exceptionalism.
Precisely. The Tafsir mentions how they would delude themselves in their religion to move attention away from their inability to meet the challenge. They would make excuses like, never will the fire touch us except for a few numbered days.
Oh, so they believe their lineage or their historical chosen status gave them a permanent get-out-of-jail-free card.
Exactly. It was a coping mechanism to avoid engaging with the reality of their failure to meet the literary and divine challenge that was sitting right in front of them.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the transition into verse 24, because this is where the text pivots from a literary dare to an eternal, absolute prophecy.
It is a massive shift in the text.
Let's look at the exact wording of the transition in the translation. After issuing the challenge to produce a single chapter, the text says, "But if you do not, and you will never be able to."
We have to isolate that specific phrase, and you will never be able to.
Right.
Tafsir ibn Kathir identifies this specific phrase as an independent miracle in its own right, separate from the linguistic perfection of the rest of the text.
Wait, why an independent miracle? Just because of the predictive nature of it?
Because Allah is not just issuing a challenge here. Allah confirms that no one will be able to produce even a single chapter like the ones in the Quran, because the Quran is Allah's speech which no human being can match.
So it is an eternal, absolute prediction about the future of all human capability.
Yes, the author of the text is stating unequivocally that no human being ever will be able to do this, and none will ever do.
If you step back and look at that objectively, Predicting the eternal failure of human literature is incredibly daring.
It really is.
I mean, think about the vulnerability of an author doing that. If a human author wrote this, they would be taking a colossal risk. You write a book, you tell the whole world no one can write 3 sentences as good as this, and you risk being proven wrong the very next day by some prodigy.
It is the ultimate intellectual gamble if it is coming from a human mind. Because human history is defined by records being broken. The fastest runner is eventually beaten, the greatest building is surpassed.
But the fact that this specific claim stands unchallenged, that no one has objectively debunked this in 14 centuries, despite immense motivation to do so, is presented by the scholars as undeniable empirical proof.
Their inability to do so is proof that the Quran is divine revelation.
And that leads to the critical pivot in the text. Because if the text is the speech of the Creator and human failure proves it is not man-made, then the grace period of the intellectual challenge is basically over.
The disbelievers are completely out of excuses. Allah then continues to say that if disbelievers cannot produce even a single chapter, like the ones in the Quran, then the disbelievers should be ready to face the consequences of rejecting the truth about Islam.
The tone of the verse shifts so dramatically here. It goes from a cerebral, almost academic literary dare to a stark, visceral warning.
Yes, it becomes a dire warning.
The verse concludes by saying the disbelievers should fear the fire whose fuel is people and stones, which is prepared for disbelievers.
We need to analyze the specific theological phrasing here. Prepare for the disbelievers. The hellfire is made ready for the unbelievers who will be punished in it.
Right, that word, prepared.
This specific past tense phrasing raises an important theological question that the classical scholars debated extensively. Does hell exist right now in our current timeline, or is it something that will be created at the end of time, after the day of judgment?
Oh, that is a massive distinction, because if it is created later, it feels kind of like an abstract threat. But prepared implies it is already a reality.
And according to the consensus of the Tafsir, this verse proves that hell now exists. If hell didn't exist before, now it does, since this verse has been revealed.
Wow.
We learn from this verse that hell has been prepared to chastise the disbelievers and pagans. It is an established physical reality. It is not just some metaphor for future regret.
It is a sobering concept. I mean, the text is saying the finest is already built, the trap is already set. It establishes a harsh binary reality for human existence.
It absolutely does. The sources make this clear. Just as there is only one earth where we live and die, just like that, there is only 2 destinations after death, heaven and hell.
There is no third option. No purgatorial middle ground for those who heard the clear truth and chose to reject it out of ego or hatred.
No. And Allah is the owner of heaven, hell, and earth. He dictates the physical laws of all 3 realms.
Which brings us to the mechanics of that realm, because this is where the imagery gets incredibly vivid and frankly disturbing. The verse doesn't just say, fear the fire. It explicitly defines the fuel of this fire.
Yes, it says it is a fire whose fuel is men and stones.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting to me. Why stones? My mind immediately goes to the old fire and brimstone concept in Christianity. Is this a shared theological concept? Or is the Tafsir pointing to something uniquely literal here?
The inclusion of stones is one of the most arresting images in the entire text, and it operates on multiple levels. Physically, Tafsir Ibn Kathir explains that stones mentioned in this verse could be stones of sulfur.
Oh, so not just ordinary river rocks you build a campfire with.
Right. Giant, rotten, black stones of sulfur. So while there are thematic overlaps with the broader Abrahamic concept of brimstone, the Tafsir is describing a literal physical reality of the hellfire's composition.
But wait, stones do not burn? We build fire pits out of stones specifically because they resist combustion. How does a rock act as fuel?
Well, we have to look at how we understand physics. Just as how wood can ignite fire in this world due to reasons no man created. I mean, we didn't invent the chemical process of combustion, we just observe it, right? The physics of the next life are entirely under the command of the Creator. Allah established the physical laws of this universe, and He establishes the laws of the next.
That makes sense.
So similarly, the fuel of hellfire is people and stones. It operates on a physics fueled by these massive stones of sulfur. And can you imagine the intensity of hellfire which can melt stone?
Just as wood is burnt to ashes while igniting the fire in this world, this fire uses rocks as kindling.
Exactly. It is a terrifying scale of heat designed specifically to chastise.
So there is this terrifying physical reality to it. But the classical scholars, particularly in Tafsir al-Jalalain, don't just stop at the physical, do they? There is a deeper symbolic devastation associated with these stones.
There is. Tafsir al-Jalalain, cross-referencing with Quran chapter 21, brings forward the spiritual layer, because Allah tells us in chapter 21 of the Quran that disbelievers and what they worship other than Allah are the fuel of hell. The stones mentioned in this verse could be the idols people used to worship in this world. The false gods made of stone, which you worship, will be the fuel of hellfire.
Think about the psychological horror of that for a 7th century pagan listener.
It is staggering.
You spend your whole life carving a statue out of stone. You pour your wealth into it. You bow to it. You sacrifice to it. You beg it to protect you from harm, to bring you rain, to save you in the afterlife.
You anchor your entire existential security to this object.
Yes. And the Quran is telling you that on the day of judgment, that exact piece of stone you relied on for salvation is going to be thrown into the fire with you, to be the very source of your burning.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the futility of polytheism. It is the cosmic irony of associating partners with the Creator.
It's basically saying the thing you loved more than the truth will be the thing that burns you.
The text is giving a stark warning. Be mindful of whom you take as a god besides Allah.
But the fuel isn't just the idols. The verse is explicit. The fuel is people and stones. And the sources point out something incredibly important here. This isn't just a threat directed outward at the pagans.
No, the inclusion of the word people carries a massive warning for those who consider themselves inside the fold of faith as well.
That is a crucial nuance.
Yes. The sources clarify that if you are a believer and continue to do evil deeds, then even you will be questioned. You do not get a free pass just because you acknowledge the Creator exists.
That's why Allah mentioned people in this verse, rather than just repeating the disbelievers.
Exactly. It is a universal warning about ultimate accountability. It strips away any sense of religious entitlement.
It forces a reckoning with the sheer scale of divine power versus human frailty. I mean, we are dealing with concepts, eternal fire, melting stones, divine decrees, that are really hard for the human mind to grasp.
They are out of our understanding, certainly. But Allah has power over all things and can do anything. Just as we are born on this earth through biological processes we didn't invent, the mechanics of hell fueled by people and stones are established by that same Creator.
And it really puts human arrogance into perspective. Think about the most powerful people on earth today. The billionaires, the tech moguls, the political dictators, they project absolute control.
Right, they act as if they dictate the terms of reality.
But this verse strips all of that away. I mean, can you really go up against the owner of heaven, hell, and earth?
It exposes the sheer absurdity of human arrogance.
If you are listening to this and you feel powerful, if your ego makes you feel invincible, just know that your place of residence, this entire planet, is not even visible from outer space.
That is a very humbling thought.
You or any human is no match to the power of Allah.
And the Quran doesn't just ask the reader to take this on blind faith regarding the future. It constantly points to historical, empirical proofs.
Like the stories of past nations.
Yes, the Quran mentions stories about the people of the past, which haven't been proven wrong. The Quran is true in the stories it narrates.
Nations like Thamud or the people of Lot. These were superpowers of their time.
They carved cities out of solid mountains. They were wealthy, technologically advanced, and incredibly arrogant. They denied their prophets, they mocked the warnings of divine concordance, and they were completely destroyed.
So these historical precedents serve as tangible proof within the text that the warnings are real.
Exactly. It's a reminder that your worldly power will not save you.
Okay, so we have this 1,400-year unbeatable literary challenge that proves the text is divine revelation. We have the psychological analysis of why people reject it through excuses and hatred. We have the terrifying reality of a hellfire that already exists, fueled by stone idols and arrogant people. Taking all of this into account, what is the actionable takeaway for the listener?
The core lesson here is action, grounded in deep gratitude. In the verse right before this challenge, verse 22, Allah outlines the baseline of his provision for humanity.
Right, what he provided for us.
He made the earth a bed for you to live on. He made the sky a protective ceiling. He sends down rain to bring forth fruits for your provision.
He gave us the habitat to survive and thrive.
So the guidance here is, if Allah has put you in a position where you eat well, live well, and are safe, then do your part in this world as it will only benefit you.
It's a reciprocal relationship, but one where the benefit flows entirely to the human. And doing your part is defined by a very clear framework.
Yes. The guidance here is to follow the commandments and prohibitions set forth in the Quran. Believe in Islam and everything that Islam has ordained. Do not do what Islam prohibits.
To frame it the way the classical scholars often do,
Mm-hmm.
do not use what Allah has given you to do what Allah prohibits, and do not hold back what Allah has given you from doing what Allah has commanded you.
That is a perfect summary. If you were given intellect, don't use it to invent excuses to reject the truth. Use it to seek the truth.
And furthermore, the sources emphasize a specific heavy duty placed upon the Muslims who carry this text today.
Right. Because Muslims are blessed with the example of what happens when the chosen people do not do the job they were commanded to do.
Referencing the earlier scriptural communities who lost their way.
Yes. Thus, it is important for Muslims to not only act as per teachings of Quran, but to also spread the message of Islam.
It is the moral obligation of knowing the truth. You cannot just hoard the message. You have to share the warning and the invitation.
Precisely.
This has been a really heavy, profoundly deep journey into a text that just refuses to be ignored. If the things we falsely worship and rely on today become the very fuel of our own destruction tomorrow, what is the one true thing you're anchoring your soul to right now? Because remember, you're reading a book that doesn't just tell you a comfortable story. It challenges you, it exposes your ego, it predicts your failure, and it looks you right in the eye and asks, what are you going to do now?
فإن لم تفعلوا ولن تفعلوا فاتقوا النار التي وقودها الناس والحجارة أعدت للكافرين.
فإن لم تفعلوا ولن تفعلوا فاتقوا النار التي وقودها الناس والحجارة أعدت للكافرين.